After graduating high school, I decided to take a gap year to work and save money before college. I was living at home, but my parents were constantly on my case about everything. What time I came home, who I hung out with, when I did chores. At 21, I was tired of being treated like a kid, so I started looking for roommates online. That's when I met my future roommate through a housing Facebook group. She seemed normal enough during our initial conversations. She had a steady job, good references, and could pay her half of rent on time. We found a decent two-bedroom apartment, and I figured splitting costs would help me save more money for when I eventually started college. The first red flag should have been when we were apartment hunting. Every place we looked at, she'd make comments about how she didn't like this or that, but I assumed she was just being particular about where she'd be living for the next year. I didn't realize she was already planning to control every aspect of our shared space. Things started small when we moved in. I had furnished most of the common areas since I've been collecting furniture and household items while living at home. I brought my couch, coffee table, dining set, rugs, decorative pillows, wall art, dishes, and kitchen appliances. She basically showed up with just her bedroom furniture and a dining table. Within the first month, I started noticing some of my dishes and silverware going missing. When I asked about them, she acted confused and claimed she thought the blue ceramic bowls were ours to share. She said she had put them in her room since she used them for cereal in the mornings. I told her I had bought those before we moved in together, but she insisted that as roommates we should share everything. I was annoyed but figured it wasn't worth fighting over a few bowls. Big mistake. That just encouraged her to get bolder. Next, she started getting rid of my stuff entirely. I came home from work one day to find my living room rug missing. When I asked where it was, she told me she had thrown it away because it was ugly and didn't match anything. I asked how she could throw away my rug without asking, but she insisted it was her apartment too and she deserved to feel comfortable in her own home. I was starting to see a pattern, but I still tried to be reasonable about it. I told her I understood she wanted to feel at home, but she couldn't just throw away my stuff. I asked if there was anything I could do to make the space work better for both of us. She explained that she just wanted to live in a clean apartment. She told me that at her parents' house they didn't have decorations on the walls, no rugs, and minimal furniture. She said she was a very picky person and didn't like any of my stuff cluttering her space. The irony was incredible. She was talking about wanting a clean apartment while leaving dirty dishes in the sink for days, never vacuuming, and expecting me to do all the housework. But apparently, my throw pillows and wall art were the real problem. She even told me she hated my couch and would get rid of it if she could move it herself. I reminded her that it was my couch, that I had paid for and that she literally slept on it when she watched TV. She complained it was taking up too much space and said the place would look so much better without all my clutter. This went on for a year and a half. She'd hide my kitchen utensils in her room, throw away my decorative items when I wasn't home, and constantly complain about how my belongings were ruining her aesthetic. I felt like I was living with someone who wanted all the benefits of a furnished apartment without paying for any of it. The breaking point came when I found her trying to sell my coffee maker online. She'd posted it on Facebook Marketplace with photos taken in our kitchen. When I confronted her about it, she said we never used it anyway because she preferred tea. I told her I used it every single morning and that it was mine. She said she needed money for new curtains because this place was so ugly. That's when I realized this situation was never going to improve. She genuinely believed that because she paid half the rent, she was entitled to half of everything I owned. I started looking for new housing that same week. When lease renewal time came around, I told her I wouldn't be signing for another year. She got upset and said I was forcing her to move back in with her parents. I told her that wasn't my problem and that she had 6 months to figure out other arrangements. She accused me of abandoning her, but I explained I wasn't abandoning anyone. I was choosing not to live with someone who steals and throws away my belongings. I started packing my things early, which is when the real drama began. She watched me box up my kitchen appliances with growing panic in her eyes. She asked why I was taking so much stuff and I told her it was because everything was mine. I explained that I had owned almost everything in the apartment before we even started looking at places together. She got angry and said I couldn't do that because she paid half the rent. She claimed I'd be leaving her with nothing, but I pointed out that I thought that's what she wanted, her own space without all my stuff cluttering it up. She'd been so focused on getting rid of my things that she never considered what would happen when I actually left. She argued that it wasn't fair and that we were supposed to split things equally. I told her we weren't married and weren't even friends. I reminded her that she had spent the last year and a half insulting, hiding, and throwing away my belongings. I asked if she really thought I'd just hand over half my stuff as some kind of breakup gift. She walked off to her room, and I could hear her on the phone with her parents, crying about how I was being unfair and leaving her with nothing. Part of me felt a tiny bit bad, but mostly I felt this deep satisfaction knowing she wouldn't be able to steal, criticize, or throw away my belongings ever again. She was about to realize she'd have to actually buy her own furniture and household items for the first time. After complaining about my clutter for over a year, she was about to discover how expensive it is to furnish an apartment from scratch. When I packed up my coffee maker, my ugly couch, and all the other items she'd spent months trying to get rid of, I smiled. She'd get exactly what she always said she wanted, a clean, empty space with minimal furniture and no decorations. Too bad, she'd have to pay for it all herself. I lived with my grandmother while my parents raised my three siblings. My grandmother was the one who fed me, helped with homework, and made sure I had clean clothes for school. She worked multiple jobs to support us both while my parents focused on their other children. I always knew I was different in their eyes, but I accepted it as normal. When I turned 18, I moved in with my parents for 2 years while attending college. I paid rent the entire time and contributed to household expenses. After graduation, I found a job in another state and moved away. That was over 10 years ago, and I've been completely self-sufficient ever since. My grandmother passed away 5 years ago. I used most of my savings to help with her medical bills and funeral costs because she had given me everything. My parents attended the funeral but never offered to help. So when my youngest brother brought up money during our vacation, I wasn't prepared for the conversation that followed. My brother asked why I wasn't helping our parents with their expenses. He explained that he was paying most of their mortgage while our sister and other brother were splitting the rest. I told him I didn't know he was doing that because nobody had asked me to contribute. He said we all should be helping them, but I explained that I didn't feel obligated to support them because they never supported me. When he reminded me they were our parents, I had to tell him the truth. I explained how they didn't actually raise me and that my grandmother did. I told him about the time when I needed money for college, and my grandmother had to write them a letter asking for help with my education expenses. Their mother wrote back saying, my grandmother should teach me not to ask them for money, because what our father earned was just enough for them and my three siblings. I mentioned that my grandmother had shown me that letter. My brother looked shocked. I continued explaining how I had paid rent when I lived with them after college and contributed money when we immigrated here. But after my grandmother died, I used my savings to help her, not them, because they had made their priorities clear years ago. My brother tried to argue that things were different back then and harder, but I pointed out that maybe it was harder for them. But I was their child too, and they chose not to help me when I needed it most. The vacation ended awkwardly. A few weeks later, my phone buzzed with a long text from my mother. She accused me of being disrespectful and ungrateful, saying my brother had told her what I said and that they did their best for me. I responded that I wasn't trying to be disrespectful but was simply explaining why I didn't feel responsible for supporting them now. She brought up how I was always a difficult child and reminded me about a time when I argued with her and even pushed her during a fight. I had to explain that I remembered that day clearly because she had just told my grandmother that she should send me to work as a dancer overseas. I was 16 and got upset because I knew what that really meant. She claimed they needed money and that I could have helped the family, but I had to tell her directly that she wanted to send me into trafficking because that's what those dancing jobs really were, and she knew it. When she told me not to be dramatic and brought up another incident about ruining school clothes, I had to correct her again. I explained that I didn't ruin them. She had poured soy sauce on my uniform the night before a big exam because I refused to quit school and get a job instead. She tried to claim it was an accident, but I told her it wasn't. She did it on purpose because she knew school was the only thing that mattered to me. I had to wash and iron it wet just to make it to school the next morning. She insisted I was remembering things wrong and that they sacrificed for all of us children. But I had to remind her that she sacrificed for my siblings, not me. When I lived with them, I paid rent. When I moved away, they never called unless they needed something. When my grandmother died, they didn't offer to help with her medical bills or funeral costs. She said that was different, but I asked her how it was different since my grandmother raised me when they didn't want to. When she said they had their reasons, I told her that I had mine for not supporting them now. After that exchange, my mother stopped responding to my texts. Within a month, my siblings stopped calling too. My sister sent one message saying I was being selfish and should apologize. My other brother just ignored me completely. I learned through a mutual family friend that my siblings still live in my parents' house and split all the expenses three ways. The mortgage is under $2,000, which is cheaper than most people pay for rent. My parents also get Social Security income that they use to travel back and forth to our home country several times a year. My husband and I deliberately structured our finances so either of us could cover all expenses alone. We're planning for me to stop working when we have children, but my family sees our financial stability and assumes we have extra money to give them. They could sell their house and make enough money to retire comfortably back home. My siblings could move out and start their own independent lives. Instead, they choose to live together because it's cheaper and more convenient for everyone involved. But somehow, I'm the selfish one for refusing to subsidize a household I was never truly part of. 3 months ago, I found out my parents had been telling extended family members that I abandoned them in their old age. Cousins started calling asking why I wasn't helping my elderly parents. I had to explain the real situation over and over. Last month, my brother called me one final time. He said our mother had been crying about this for months and asked if I could just help a little bit. I told him she made her choice about our relationship when I was a child, and I was making mine now as an adult. When he said family was supposed to stick together, I asked him where that philosophy was when I was growing up and when my grandmother needed help. I pointed out that they all stuck together fine without me then. He tried to say this was different, but I told him it wasn't. It was exactly the same, and he was just on the other side of it now. He hasn't called since then. My grandmother raised me when my parents died and I was 8. She was the kindest woman you could meet, always putting others before herself. She worked 2 jobs to make sure I had everything I needed, never once complaining about the sacrifice. The one luxury she owned was a beautiful golden necklace that belonged to her mother. It had detailed engravings and a small emerald pendant that caught the light perfectly. She wore it every Sunday to church and on special occasions, treating it like the treasure it was. When she got sick last year, she made me promise that she'd be buried wearing that necklace. She said it would help her feel connected to her mother in the afterlife. I told her that her wishes would be respected, no matter what anyone else thought. My grandmother had 3 children. My father, who passed away years ago, my uncle who lives across the country, and my aunt. My aunt had always been the problem child of the family. She was bitter, selfish, and always felt like everyone owed her something. She barely visited my grandmother during her illness, maybe showing up twice in the entire year, but somehow she still expected to inherit the most valuable items when the time came. The viewing was scheduled for 2 days before the burial. Family members and friends came to pay their respects throughout the afternoon. My grandmother looked peaceful in her casket, wearing her favorite blue dress and, of course, the golden necklace. I made sure the funeral director understood how important it was that she keep wearing it. Everything was going smoothly until Karen arrived with her husband and teenage son. She walked straight up to the casket without acknowledging anyone else in the room. I was standing nearby greeting visitors and accepting condolences when I noticed something strange happening. Karen kept looking around the room, checking to see who was watching her. She positioned herself so that her body blocked most people's view of the casket. Something felt off about her behavior, so I kept one eye on her while continuing to talk with the other guests. That's when I saw it happen. She reached into the casket and started fumbling with my grandmother's necklace, trying to unclasp it. This woman was actually attempting to steal from her own dead mother during the viewing. I immediately walked over and asked her loudly what she was doing. Everyone nearby could hear me. Karen jumped back like she'd been caught stealing. Her face turned bright red, and she started stammering that she was just adjusting the necklace because it looked crooked. I told her it looked like she was trying to take it off completely. She denied it and said I was being ridiculous. She asked why she would ever do such a thing. By now, several other family members and friends had gathered around, sensing the tension. My uncle hurried over from across the room and asked what was happening. I explained that I had just caught her trying to steal our grandmother's necklace. She immediately called me a liar and said she would never do such a thing. But here's where it gets really embarrassing for her. My cousin, her own son, had been recording everything on his phone because he was making a video montage for the memorial service. Without thinking, he spoke up and told his mother that he had captured everything on video. He said that she was definitely trying to remove the necklace. The entire room went silent. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's face went from red to completely white when she realized her own son had just exposed her. She told him to delete the video immediately, but he refused and said that what she did was wrong. That's when Karen completely lost it. Instead of showing any shame or remorse, she started screaming at everyone. She ranted about how this was such a waste because our grandmother was dead and didn't need the necklace anymore. She said it should go to someone who could actually use it. My uncle asked her if she was out of her mind and told her to have some respect. She shot back asking where the respect was when our grandmother gave everything to me instead of her own daughter. She said that she deserved that necklace more than anyone. I reminded her that our grandmother specifically asked to be buried wearing it, and that she knew this. But Karen said that our grandmother was senile and didn't know what she was saying. That comment pushed me over the edge. Several other family members gasped in shock. I told her to get out immediately. She argued that I couldn't make her leave and that she had just as much right to be there as anyone. That's when the funeral director stepped in. He'd been watching the whole scene unfold and had clearly heard enough. The funeral director told Karen that he was asking her to leave the premises immediately. He explained that her behavior was completely inappropriate and disrespectful to the deceased and the other mourners. She protested that he couldn't kick her out because this was her mother. He told her that he absolutely could and would, and if she didn't leave voluntarily, he would call the police to escort her out. My uncle grabbed his sister by the arm and told her that she had embarrassed herself enough for one day. When they dragged her toward the exit, she kept shouting that this wasn't over and that she was going to contest the will. She screamed that she deserved better treatment than this and that everyone was treating her like a criminal. The entire room full of mourners watched in stunned silence when she was escorted out of her own mother's viewing. My cousin stayed behind, looking mortified by his mother's behavior. He said he was sorry about what had happened and that he couldn't believe she would do something like this. I told him it wasn't his fault and thanked him for speaking up. He said to keep the video as evidence in case she tried to cause more trouble later. The rest of the viewing proceeded peacefully. Several people came up to me afterward to express their shock at what they'd witnessed. Many shared stories about how kind my grandmother had been to them over the years, which made Karen's behavior seem even more disgusting in comparison. 2 days later at the burial service, Karen didn't show up. My uncle told me she was too embarrassed to face everyone after what had happened. The golden necklace stayed exactly where it belonged, around my grandmother's neck when she was laid to rest. Several relatives cut off contact with her completely, disgusted by her behavior. My grandmother got the respectful burial she deserved, wearing the necklace she treasured, while Karen got exactly what she deserved for her greed and disrespect. I've been with my partner for 4 years now, and we have a 2-year-old daughter who takes up most of our time. Between work schedules, sleepless nights, and the constant chaos that comes with a toddler, date nights have become rare. When we finally managed to arrange for my mother-in-law to babysit last weekend, we were both excited. We decided to catch a late showing of the new action movie everyone had been talking about. The theater was about half full, which was perfect. We grabbed our usual spot in the middle section, got our overpriced popcorn, and settled in for what we hoped would be 2 hours of uninterrupted entertainment. The preview started, and I felt that familiar wave of relaxation wash over me. No diaper changes, no tantrums, no cartoon theme songs stuck in my head. Just me, my partner, and some mindless explosions on the big screen. For the first 20 minutes of the actual movie, everything was perfect. Then the teenage kid sitting directly in front of me pulled out his phone and held it up toward the screen. The bright light immediately caught my attention, especially when I realized he was taking pictures of the movie. Not just one quick shot either, he was systematically photographing different scenes, and I could see him posting them to what looked like Instagram. I tried to ignore it the first time, figuring maybe it was just a quick thing and he'd put the phone away. But then he did it again and again. By the fourth time, his phone was blocking a good portion of my view, and the constant light was becoming seriously distracting. I leaned forward and gently tapped the back of his seat. I asked him politely if he could please stop taking pictures during the movie. He turned around with this look of complete shock, like I just asked him to solve calculus in his head. He told me to watch the movie and stop bothering him, using language that would make my grandmother wash his mouth out with soap. I was taken aback by his attitude, but I figured maybe he just didn't realize how disruptive he was being. He did put his phone down though, so I thought that was sorted. My partner and I exchanged looks, and she just shrugged like kids these days don't know any better. 2 minutes later, the phone came back up. This time he was holding it even higher, and it seemed almost deliberate how much he was blocking our view. I could feel my blood pressure starting to rise, but I tried to stay calm. I told him again that I'd asked nicely for him to stop and that either he needed to put the phone away or I was going to get theater staff. He responded by telling me to mind my own business, using words that definitely weren't appropriate for a public place. That's when his mother decided to join the conversation. She whipped around in her seat like she'd been waiting for this moment. She demanded to know how I dared to tell her son what to do and told me to mind my own business using language that was even worse than her kids. Here was a grown woman defending her kid's right to be disruptive in a movie theater. I asked her if she preferred that I get the staff instead of dealing with it directly. She told me to go ahead and do exactly that, because she'd love to see what they had to say about me harassing her family. At this point, half the theater was turning to look at our little drama. I could see other moviegoers shaking their heads and looking annoyed, though I wasn't sure if it was at the family or at me for making a scene. I decided I'd had enough talking and got out to find an employee. The lobby was pretty quiet, and I quickly found a young staff member behind the concession stand. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, and he immediately grabbed a flashlight and followed me back into the theater. While we'd been gone, though, things had apparently escalated. My partner filled me in later on what happened during the 10 minutes I was away. The mother had turned around and just stared her down for what felt like forever, making obscene gestures. My partner said she felt genuinely uncomfortable and was relieved when I came back with help. The staff member asked the mother to step outside, and after about 5 minutes of heated discussion in the hallway, the father joined them. I could hear raised voices through the theater doors, but couldn't make out specific words. When they finally returned, the staff member whispered something to the teenager, who rolled his eyes but nodded. The employee told me that everything should be fine now, and that if there were any more issues, I should come find him immediately. For about 10 minutes, things were actually peaceful. The kid kept his phone in his pocket, and I started to think maybe we could salvage the rest of our date night after all. Then the teenager muttered something just loud enough for everyone around to hear that included a word I definitely don't want my own daughter learning. I just sighed and tried to focus on the movie. At this point, I was more exhausted than angry. The kid spent the rest of the film fidgeting constantly, waving his hands around as high as possible, clearly trying to be as annoying as possible without technically breaking any rules. It wasn't ideal, but at least I wasn't watching his social media feed anymore. When the credits started rolling, I thought our nightmare was over. The family started gathering their things, but instead of just leaving, they turned around to stare at us. The teenager was making these weird faces and gestures, and I could feel my patience finally snapping. I told them that they all really needed to learn some respect. That's when the kid started grabbing his crotch and making even more ridiculous faces. I actually laughed. It was so absurd and childish. I told them seriously to just grow up. All of them. We started making our way out of the theater, hoping to put this whole experience behind us. But when we passed them in the hallway, I heard one of them mutter something about maturity. That was it. 4 years of sleep deprivation and dealing with an actual toddler who behaves better than these people, and this family wanted to lecture me about maturity. I stopped walking and turned directly to the mother. I told her that she was an absolute failure as a parent, and that she should be genuinely ashamed of herself. The transformation was immediate and terrifying. This woman went from zero to completely unhinged in about 2 seconds. She stepped right up to me. I'm 6'2", and she barely came up to my chest, screaming at the top of her lungs. She told me to leave immediately and that I had no right to tell her kids what to do, demanding to know who I thought I was. I replied that since she was clearly incapable of parenting, someone needed to step in. If she wouldn't teach them basic respect, then other people would have to do it for her. That sent her completely over the edge. She started trying to get physical, pushing at my chest and screaming even louder. People were stopping to stare, and I could see theater employees starting to move in our direction. She kept yelling that I had no right at all. I asked her what exactly she was going to do about it. She threw the question right back at me, asking if I was going to hit her, if I was going to hit a woman. I actually started laughing. The whole situation was so ridiculous. I told her no because I wasn't pathetic like her family. That's when her husband finally decided to get involved. He stepped between us, holding his wife back while yelling at me. He demanded to know why I was attacking their kids and what was wrong with me. I told them both that they were failures as parents. I said to another parent to another, they absolutely disgusted me, and that they needed to stop acting like children and grow up. The whole hallway had basically turned into a spectacle at this point. The woman was still screaming, her husband was yelling about how I was attacking their kids, and I could see my partner looking mortified by the whole scene. I decided we'd had enough entertainment for one evening. When we walked toward the exit, I'll admit I threw back a few choice words of my own. Probably not my finest moment, but after dealing with their family for 2 hours, my filter was completely gone. I told them that they were exactly what was wrong with society and to enjoy raising their future criminals. My partner and I agreed that next time we're definitely choosing a different theater. My husband and I discovered thrift shopping when we were trying to furnish our first apartment on a tight budget. What started as necessity turned into our favorite weekend activity. We've become regulars at every Goodwill, Salvation Army, and local thrift shop within a 30-mile radius. Our friends think we're crazy, but we've decorated our entire home for under $300 and found designer clothes that would normally cost thousands. Today was July 4th and most stores were having holiday sales. We decided to hit the Goodwill on Cedar Street around 2 p.m. after sleeping in and having a lazy breakfast. My husband immediately went to check out the electronics section while I headed for the women's clothing. The store was busier than usual, with people looking for last-minute patriotic outfits for barbecues and fireworks shows. I found a beautiful navy blazer that still had the original tag showing it was originally priced at $89. The Goodwill price tag said $4.99. I also grabbed a pair of designer jeans in my exact size for $7. When I made my way to check out around 2:30 p.m., there was only one register open. About 6 people were waiting in line ahead of me. The cashier was a college-age guy wearing a Stars and Stripes t-shirt that seemed perfect for the holiday. Standing directly in front of me was an older couple, probably in their early 70s. The man wore a Vietnam veteran cap and had an American flag pin on his jacket. The woman carried a large leather purse decorated with multiple patriotic pins and patches. They had a cart full of items, including some vintage American memorabilia they'd found. The couple started complimenting the cashier on his shirt choice for Independence Day. The husband told him it was refreshing to see young people still showing respect for the flag. The cashier thanked them politely and mentioned he owned another shirt with 1876 printed across the front. He shared a story about how a customer yesterday had actually asked him what the number 1876 meant. When they asked how old the customer was, he said around 29. This information didn't surprise the older couple at all. The husband immediately launched into a rant about how young people today lack basic knowledge about American history. He said kids these days were ungrateful, uneducated, and had no sense of patriotism. He complained that this ignorance was exactly why the country had gone downhill over the past few decades. He claimed that people from his generation had been working tirelessly to fix all the problems caused by younger generations. The wife nodded along, adding that schools weren't teaching proper history anymore. She said parents weren't taking responsibility for educating their children about important American values. I felt my jaw tighten as I listened to their sweeping generalizations. They were condemning an entire generation based on one person's question. Maybe that 29-year-old was an immigrant still learning about American history. Maybe he was homeschooled and had some gaps in his education. Maybe he was just having a momentary brain fog. Maybe he was testing the cashier's knowledge instead of showing ignorance. The assumption that all young people are automatically stupid and unpatriotic really bothered me. I tried to keep my expression neutral, but my frustration must have been obvious. The husband suddenly turned around and noticed me standing behind them. His eyes scanned me from head to toe, taking in my casual sundress and sandals. I probably looked like I was in my 20s to him. A smug expression crossed his face as he decided to test me. He asked me directly if I knew what the year 1876 represented in American history. His tone was patronizing, like a teacher questioning a student he expected to fail. The question caught me off guard, not because I didn't know the answer, but because of his condescending approach. I told him that of course I knew, and that it wasn't pleasant for him to assume otherwise. He insisted that I prove my knowledge by stating the answer out loud. The cashier had stopped scanning items and was watching our exchange with growing discomfort. Other people in line were starting to pay attention to what was happening. The wife was looking back and forth between us like she was watching a confrontation unfold. I stared at him for several seconds, really getting tired of this ridiculous game. I told him flatly that 1876 was when America declared independence from Britain. The man let out a short, surprised laugh like he hadn't expected me to know the correct answer. Then his expression shifted as he tried to process this information. I could see the wheels turning in his head as he looked me over again. He was probably trying to figure out my age to see if I fit into his narrative about ignorant young people. Then he crossed a major line by asking me how old I was. The audacity of this stranger asking such a personal question in public was unbelievable. His wife started looking embarrassed and tugged gently on his sleeve. She quietly told him to drop the subject and finish their purchase. The cashier looked like he wanted to crawl under the counter and hide. Other customers were now openly staring at our confrontation. I felt a cold smile spread across my face. It was the kind of smile I get when someone has just walked straight into a trap of their own making. I told him I was 35 years old. Then I asked if he thought it was appropriate to ask a woman her age. I wondered out loud whether his generation had been taught basic manners or if he had simply chosen to ignore that particular lesson. The silence that followed was absolutely deafening. You could have heard the pin drop in that entire section of the store. His face went through multiple shades of red before settling on something resembling a ripe tomato. His mouth opened and closed repeatedly like a fish gasping for air out of water. He looked like I had completely short-circuited his brain with my response. His wife was now pulling more insistently on his shoulder. She was telling him they needed to finish up and leave immediately. She was clearly mortified by her husband's behavior and the scene he had created. The poor cashier looked like he wanted to disappear entirely. Other customers were whispering among themselves about what they had just witnessed, but the husband was still standing there frozen. trying to process what had just happened. I had turned his own generational stereotyping and prejudice right back on him. He clearly hadn't expected any kind of pushback or resistance to his assumptions. Suddenly, there was movement at the second checkout station. Another cashier, an older woman with gray hair, had quickly opened her register. She was frantically waving me over, telling me she could help me immediately. I grabbed my items and walked over to her station with as much dignity as I could muster. Behind me, I could hear the couple trying to finish their transaction in extremely awkward silence. The second cashier scanned my blazer and jeans quickly without making any eye contact. She clearly understood that the less said about the situation, the better for everyone involved. She told me my total was $12.98. I handed her $15 and received my change along with the receipt. She bagged my items efficiently and wished me a happy Independence Day. I thanked her and looked back at the first register where the couple was finally completing their purchase. The husband still looked completely stunned by our exchange. His wife was clearly trying to hurry him along and get out of there as quickly as possible. Just as I was heading toward the exit, my husband appeared from the electronics section. He was carrying a vintage radio that he'd found for $12. He asked if I was ready to leave and whether I'd found anything interesting. I linked my arm through his and steered us toward the door. I told him I'd explain everything once we were safely in our car. When we passed the older couple in the parking lot, I could hear the wife giving her husband an earful. She was telling him in hushed but urgent tones that his behavior had been completely inappropriate. She said he had embarrassed both of them and owed me an apology. He was trying to defend himself, saying he was just making conversation and testing people's knowledge. She wasn't buying his excuses and continued scolding him as they got into their car. The entire store had gone quiet during our confrontation. I could feel multiple sets of eyes watching as we made our exit. My husband looked completely confused, but waited until we were in our car to ask what had happened. When I recounted the entire encounter, he shook his head and started laughing. He said he wished he'd been there to see the man's face when I turned the tables on him. He couldn't believe the guy had the nerve to quiz a stranger and then ask my age. I told him that the man's expression was truly something to behold. I said I thought I might have completely broken his brain with my comeback about manners. When we drove home, I spent time reflecting on the whole experience. Part of me felt slightly guilty for embarrassing the man in public, but a much larger part of me felt satisfied that I had stood up to his prejudiced assumptions. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me at all. He had complained about young people lacking manners while demonstrating absolutely terrible manners himself. He had made assumptions about my knowledge and age based purely on my appearance. He had turned a simple checkout interaction into an uncomfortable confrontation. At least I walked away with a fantastic blazer for under $5.